The first thing that survived Harun's march was the screaming. It clung to the recordings long after the fires had burned out. In the helmet cameras of human Marines, it came in bursts. Nemani voices, pitched high and ragged, cut off in flashes of white and static. In the shipboard feeds, it threaded through sensor readouts and tactical overlays, an unending chorus that refused to be reduced to numbers. Sergeant Tobin Ikuhara heard it even after the sound had been muted. He sat in the dim quiet of HSV Ironwind's debriefing bay, hands clasped between his knees, staring at the frozen image hovering before him. It showed his own point of view from half an hour earlier. Shattered stone, dust hanging in orange light, the shape of a Nemani juvenile pressed into a doorway, thin fingers over its ear slits. Behind that small figure, a Khoryx trooper was stepping into frame, impeller rifle already rising. Pause, Tobin thought, as if his wish could jump back in time and catch the other version of himself before he cleared the corner. Get down! Get down! The old impulse rose again, useless and automatic. He could still feel the weight of the rifle in his hands, the crush of his armor along his ribs, the knowledge that he had been half a breath too late. The door hissed open, light flared across the room. Enough, said Commodore Hale. The playback dissolved. The hovering image flattened to a neutral grid, then vanished. Tobin blinked, dragged his gaze up. Hale loomed in the doorway, silhouette a block against the bright corridor beyond. The lines around his eyes were carved deep by past campaigns. His close-cropped hair shot through with ash-white streaks that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with stress. He stepped inside, and the door closed behind him with the soft finality of a sealed bulkhead. "Sir," Tobin said, his throat scratched on the single syllable. Hale studied him for a moment, as if taking stock of damage. He knew in detail what the young sergeant had just watched. He had already viewed the same footage from 6 different angles, and dozens of others besides. Not for the first time, he wished he could forget them. "How many times, Ikuhara?" Hale asked quietly. Tobin swallowed. "This was the 5th, sir." Hale knew it had been 9. The system logs had told him. He sat, uninvited, across from Tobin, the chair complaining under his weight. "You're not going back in there without me," Hale said. "Not tonight." Tobin's head jerked up. "There are frames I didn't. I thought if I checked the angles again, maybe I'd see a way I could have reached that bunker in time." "You couldn't have," Hale said. "There was no softness in it, but there was no condemnation either. And you know that. Your squad was 6 minutes from that corridor when the Khoryx opened fire on the bunkers. The only thing you can do to help those people now is testify." The word tasted bitter to Tobin. To who? Hale did not answer immediately. His gaze, unfocused, passed briefly through the metal wall, seeing instead the council chamber on Trinal Citadel, the polished expanse of it, the way light reflected off Cyrethi crest jewels and Praetorian armor. "They will listen," he said, more firmly than he felt. "They have to. We brought back everything, every angle, every order." Tobin, who had run through the rubble and smoke of Harun's march, who had heard council liaison officers on the ground say, "Stand down, human deployment, unnecessary," as Khoryx armor rolled over Nemani crop fields, heard the doubt beneath the words. "Do they?" Tobin asked. Hale's jaw tightened. The question lodged there, like shrapnel. He rose. "Get some rest, Sergeant," he said. "Medbay at 8 a.m. Then I want you with the survivor liaison team. Delem specifically requested you." Tobin blinked. "The historian? The one who keeps staring at our cameras like they're a miracle and a curse," Hale said. "Yes." He keyed the bay's lights lower, as if that alone could soften the starkness of the room, then left. The door sealed behind him. Tobin was alone again, save for the ghosts he carried. Far above the debriefing bay, at the very spine of Ironwind, the ship's main briefing hall thrummed with a different tension. Holographic displays painted the air with orbit lines and tactical minimaps. At the center floated Harun's march, an agricultural world stripped to schematic abstraction, its green arcs overlaid with scattered, ugly bands of burnt orange. Civilians lost, infrastructure destroyed, soil contamination, The figures updated as more data from the Nimani survivors flowed in. Iseul Garen stood near the rail, arms folded, watching the numbers climb. She had been embedded with Ironwind's task force for 3 months, long enough to learn the peculiar rhythms of a human flagship at war and peace at once. She knew the murmur of engineers in the mess, the off-key songs of Marines in their bunks, the little rituals people built around coffee machines and card games. Tonight those sounds were absent. The hall smelled of sweat and metal and the faint ozone of overtaxed projection arrays. Renan Hale strode to the center of the space, flanked by 2 officers. His presence drew silence, the way a gravitic singularity drew light. "Here," he said, gesturing. The orbit over Harun's march zoomed, star lines bending into arcs of figures. "This is what we can prove." Iseul's recorder hung at her hip. She knew it was redundant. The hall's systems were already capturing every word, every pixel. Still, her fingers itched toward it, like a habit. Council protocol forbade independent journalistic recordings during classified fleet briefings, especially those involving incidents under investigation. She had agreed to those terms to get aboard Ironwind in the first place. She wondered, not for the first time, whether she was going to break them. "Civilian casualties," Hale said. "Preliminary verified, 21,000, with an uncertainty margin that doesn't matter, because it's obscene either way." Numbers, Iseul thought. If you say them quickly enough, they sound like coordinates, not lives. The Khoryx assault, Hale continued, began at 3 p.m. local, under the pretext of responding to an alleged Nimani insurrection. They opened fire on unarmed crowds within 60 seconds of groundfall. Our response time was constrained by Council liaison directives that limited human deployment until we could verify the nature of the disturbance. He did not look at Iseul, but he didn't have to. Her earlier confrontation with the liaison officer's planet side had been part of those recordings too. A voice from the far side of the hall. "Commodore, is there any evidence the Nimani fired first at all?" Hale's expression did not change. "None," he said. "Not from our sensors, not from Nimani feeds, not from what's left of the colony's security systems. The only outgoing fire we registered from Nimani positions was after the Khoryx had already initiated lethal force on civilians." He reached into the holofield. It responded to his presence, portions of the planetary schematic glowing under his fingers. "Every metric we have," Hale said, "every angle, every timestamp, points to a unilateral massacre." The word fell into the silence so heavily that even the machine seemed to hesitate. Iseul watched him carefully. She knew Hale's reputation. Steady, unflappable, more comfortable with logistics than speeches. She had pored over his past campaigns before embedding with his task force. In each, he had stuck to his orders, with a stubbornness that some called principled and others called inflexible. Now, for the first time since she had known him, there was a hairline crack. He believes in the system, Iseul thought. Or he did. When the briefing ended, she intercepted him before he reached the exit. "Commodore," she said. His eyes flicked to her recorder, then to her face. "This is still a restricted environment, Garen." "I know," she said. "I'm not recording. Officially." He exhaled, a brief, humorless sound. "That's not as reassuring as you might think." She stepped aside, letting a stream of officers pass between them before continuing. "The footage," Iseul said. "All of it. You're planning to take it to the Council." "That is the protocol," Hale said. "We log everything. We present our case. We let the process work. And if the process doesn't?" she asked. Hale's gaze cooled. "Do you have a specific concern?" he asked. Iseul thought of the stories she had dug out of archives on outlying worlds, the quiet rumors of stability operations gone wrong, the way any demand for video evidence was always answered with the same phrases. "Unverified, unavailable, classified." "I have a pattern," she said. "Not just here. Other colonies, other species. Incidents where the only thing missing was this." She tapped the air where the planet had hovered. "Clear, cross-validated recordings." "We have those now," Hale said. "Harun's march is not going to disappear into a file." "Unless someone makes it," Iseul said. "You're a new power at the table, Commodore. The Council's majors have been running this arrangement for centuries. They know how to bury things. Hale's hands tightened behind his back. I am aware, he said, that humanity is late to this party. I am also aware that if we want to keep our seat, we must operate within the framework we agreed to. That means presenting evidence, not preempting judgment in the media arena. Iseul stepped closer. Around them, the hall was almost empty. Those who remained made a point of not listening. This isn't about headlines, she said. You saw what they did down there. How long do you think that footage will survive once it leaves your ship and goes into their archives? Hale's jaw worked once, silent. Until we know otherwise, he said. We operate in good faith. The phrase sounded to Iseul like something memorized from a treaty. Good faith, she repeated. Tell that to the Neymani. His eyes flashed. For a heartbeat, she thought she had pushed too far. Then he stepped past her. Get some rest, Garen, he said. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. we begin uplink prep for Trinal Citadel. He didn't have to add, and you'll be where you are supposed to be, saying what your embed contract permits, nothing more. But she had not signed up with Ironwind because she was good at staying within limits. Out past the hull plates of the flagship, a filament of blue-white light threaded through the dark. It was barely visible to the naked eye from this distance, a slender curve rising across the star field like a question mark, the Lumen Arch. It had been a human proposal to the Council, a gesture of integration, they had called it, an enormous communication structure, anchored across several stable points in space, harmonizing human and Council relay protocols into a mesh that could carry high-bandwidth transmissions across enormous distances with minimal lag. Officially, it was a symbol of trust. To Talia Oduro, it was a lattice of opportunities. She sat in the heart of Ironwind's communications core, legs tucked under her chair, hands skating over a spread of floating interfaces. Lines of signal analysis pulsed around her, some so dense they looked like woven fabric. She had already cried once today, in the privacy of a maintenance crawl space, after watching the raw, unedited feed from Harun's march. Now her eyes were dry and red, her hair tied back with a strip of elastic scavenged from a bundle of fiber cables. The Council auditors sat behind her, wearing the humorless expressions of people convinced that they held a moral veto over everyone else. Two were Cyrethi, their elongated faces unreadable behind reflective eye shields. One was a Praetorini, enormous even when seated, armor plates gleaming under the core's light. We will begin cross-checking your erasure procedures, said the lead auditor, his Siriethi accent clipping the human words. Please access your primary data vault for the Harun's March incident. Yes, Inspector, Talia said, with a meekness she did not feel. Her fingers moved. The interfaces obediently blossomed, revealing nested directories and archival hubs. Massive blocks of data lit up in warning yellow, flagged for deletion under Council Directive 213.9. On one level, Talia did exactly what she was supposed to do. She initiated a full erasure routine, cycling caches, overwriting sectors with random noise. The auditors watched the progress bars, with the hawkish focus of customs officers scanning luggage. On another level, in threads of code the auditors could not see, she did something else. Humans had engineered their systems with an almost pathological insistence on redundancy. Every recording had copies on mission servers, personal rigs, auxiliary units, and what were politely called "oh hell" backups, encrypted, automated mirrors that kicked in whenever anything was flagged as sensitive. They were not supposed to trigger during Council-supervised purges. They were supposed to shut off, trusting external oversight. Talia had found the line of code that enforced that trust within an hour of the directive arriving. She had commented it out with one stroke, her fingers trembling. Now, as the auditors watched sectors vanish, those same blocks of data quietly reappeared elsewhere, disguised. Helmet cams and ship logs broke apart into packets, tiny slivers of sound and image, invisible amid the terabytes of navigation pings and maintenance alerts. Ironwind exchanged with the Lumen Arch every minute. Talia salted them through low-priority queues, embedded them in checksum padding, scattered them like seeds along every available route. Council filters were good, but they were built on predictable assumptions. That dangerous content arrived in large, contiguous bursts, that it carried recognizable markers of compression and encoding. What Talia was doing looked instead like what it officially was: noise. Minuscule corrections to routine transmissions. No auditor in the galaxy had enough patience to pick apart that lattice thing by thing, and even if they did, by the time they noticed, copies would be everywhere. She glanced up at one of the peripheral displays, where a schematic of the lumen arch curved like a luminous spine. She thought of the Nemani child in the bunker, wide eyes turned toward Tobin's camera. She thought of Iseul's low-voiced arguments in the mess, the journalist's impatience with careful procedures and delayed justice. She thought of her grandmother on Earth, recall stories told on a cracked veranda about a time when powerful governments had tried to suppress witnesses, and how ordinary people had responded by pointing cameras at everything and refusing to look away. Status? The Praetorini auditor rumbled. Primary stores scrubbed, Talia said, letting genuine tension color her voice. It cost her nothing. She was terrified. Secondary caches in progress. That includes our redundant arrays, as per regulations. Good, the Cyriethy inspector said. Continue. You understand, Specialist Oduro, that any attempt to conceal prohibited material will be considered an act of hostility. Yes, Inspector, Talia said, and smiled at the screen, where under the guise of routine navigation drift corrections, Harun's march was already spreading along the arch. Trinal's citadel hung in the void like a crown of dark glass. The station's design was meant to impress. Multiple rings interlocked around a central axis, each segment slowly rotating to simulate gravity, each surface intricately patterned with docking arms and sensor blisters. Dozens of ships rode its perimeter, like remoras clinging to a leviathan. Within, politics churned. Ambassador Kareem Solanki paused outside the main council chamber, straightened the collar of his deep blue formal jacket, and forced his hand to release its death grip on the edge of his datapad. He had been trained to project calm. His early postings had been to raw, jittery colonies, where any hint of nervousness from an Earth representative could start a cascade of panic. He had learned to school his face, to keep his voice level even when the floor felt like it was shaking. Today, he felt everything wobble. The doors to the chamber slid aside with ceremonious slowness. Sound spilled out. Layered voices in a dozen registers, the soft thunder of Praetorian boots, the sibilant undertones of Cyriethy's speech. Kareem entered into a storm of attention. The seating tiers rose around the central well where speakers addressed the assembly. In their curved rows sat representatives of member species, their colors and forms a catalog of the known galaxy. Above, banners of light displayed the insignias of the council and its major blocks. At the far side of the chamber, elevated on a dais, Archon Velis watched him. The Cyriethy leader's crest ornaments caught the chamber's glow, casting reflections like cold fire. Velis's face was long and smooth, the lines around his slitted eyes subtle, but Kareem had spent enough time with Cyriethy to read the faint flicker of annoyance. "You are late, Ambassador Solanki," Velis said, as Kareem took his place at the human delegation's table. "My apologies, Archon," Kareem said. "I was conferring with my mission staff about the materials we've submitted regarding Harun's march. There is a great deal to organize." Velis inclined his head. "Materials," he said. "Yes, we will come to that." The Archon rose, and the murmurs in the chamber stilled. "Representatives," Velis said, "we convene under difficult circumstances. An incident on Harun's march has disturbed the equilibrium of our outer sectors. Preliminary reports have described it in emotive, imprecise terms that are not conducive to reasoned judgment." Kareem's fingers twitched against his datapad. He tamped down the impulse to stand. "The purpose of this session," Velis continued, "is to initiate a formal inquiry into the events at Harun's march, to determine the scope of the disturbance and the appropriate stabilizing measures. I must, however, remind all present that premature dissemination of unverified accounts can inflame tensions and threaten the safety of many worlds." A ripple of agreement sounded from some tiers. From others came only silence. Kareem knew which seats those were, the minor species with too much to lose and too little power to speak. Velis's gaze swept the chamber and came to rest on Kareem. "Ambassador Solanki," the Archon said, The human delegation has submitted an extensive archive of their sensor logs and field recordings from Harun's march. As per Council emergency protocols, these have been sequestered for forensic analysis. It is therefore both necessary and appropriate that we issue certain restrictions. The word dropped like a stone. Restrictions, Kareem repeated before he could stop himself. Velis smiled thinly. While the inquiry is ongoing, the Archon said, all transmission of primary Harun's march material from human systems is to be suspended. This includes shipboard records, field devices, personal archives, and any derivative works. Dissemination would risk panic and misinterpretation. Kareem stood. With respect, Archon, he said, hearing his own heartbeat in his ears. Dissemination would also allow those directly affected to see what happened. The Nemini survivors aboard Ironwind have expressed a strong desire. They are distraught, Velis said smoothly. We owe them time to heal before exposing them to images that could re-traumatize. Kareem thought of the Nemani historian Delem, eyes sharper than any blade, voice steady as they had recounted precise casualties, structural collapses, the way the dust had tasted in their mouths. Archon, Kareem said, you know as well as I do that the Council has, in the past, withheld evidence of abuses under the same rationale, that it was done in the name of stability, that it did not, in fact, prevent further abuses. A murmur ran through the hall. Some of it had teeth. Velis's eyes thinned. Ambassador, he said, humanity is a recent addition to this assembly. Your people have made impressive strides, but you are still new to the delicate balance we maintain. There are forces in this galaxy that do not share your fondness for public exposition. Kareem thought of Khoryx troop carriers burning fields, while liaison officers called it a containment exercise. We have a fondness, he said, for accountability. And admirable sentiment, Velis replied, with the sheen of false praise. One that will serve you well when applied through proper channels. The directive stands. All Harun's march material is to be erased from non-council systems. Any deviation will be treated as an attempt to destabilize the order that has kept this galaxy from tearing itself apart. Kareem looked up at the vault of the chamber, at the hanging lights that symbolize centuries of agreements, compromises, and buried truths. So we are to trust, he said, that the same structure that permitted this atrocity will also be the sole arbiter of what is acceptable to know about it. Velis's smile did not waver. You are to trust, the Archon said, that the alternative is far worse. That night, in a secure channel that hummed like a wire drawn too taut, Kareem's face appeared on a small private display in Renan Hale's quarters aboard Ironwind. The Commodore had stripped down to his undershirt, but there was nothing relaxed in his posture. The room around him was functional, almost bare. A bunk, a desk, a single framed image of a coastline on Earth that had survived flood projections through an improbable combination of luck and sand reinforcement. They gave the order, Kareem said without preamble. Hale nodded. He had not expected anything else. Scope? He asked. All of it, Kareem said. Every recording, every log that references Harun's march. They're sending auditors and council guard to supervise the purge. You'll have them on your decks within the hour. On whose authority? Hale's voice had an edge now, honed on decades of chain of command. Archon Velis invoked emergency stabilization statutes, Kareem said. You know the ones. They were supposed to apply to high-risk biohazard events, rogue stellar projects, that scale of threat. Now, they're being used for images. Hale scrubbed a hand over his face. And your formal position? He asked. I protested, Kareem said. It's in the record. You can replay it if you enjoy experiencing frustration secondhand. Hale did not need to. He could picture it. Kareem standing in the council chamber, voice steady, eyes burning. It would change nothing. Renan, Kareem said, softening. Officially, you are bound. You know that. The ink on our accession treaties is barely dry. If you openly defy a council directive now, they will use that to paint humanity as reckless, untrustworthy. They will make Harun's march about us instead of about the Nemani. And unofficially? Hale asked. Kareem hesitated. Unofficially, he said. If those recordings vanish into the vault and never come out again, the Nemani will know who failed them. And it won't just be Cyrethi and Khoryx names they remember. In the pause that followed, Hale heard not just Kareem's words, but echoes from his own past. He remembered a different briefing room, years earlier, on a different ship, a different incident, one that had ended with human Marines in a ravaged settlement, and later with a classified report that vanished into a human-only archive. He had signed off on it. Then, trusting a system that was still almost entirely Earth's own, he had watched, over the years, as that file sat untouched. No charges filed, no reparations, no public trial. We said, Hale murmured, more to himself than to Kareem, that if we ever made it out here, we would be better. Did you? Kareem asked. There was no accusation in it, only an exhausted curiosity. Yes, Hale said. We did. Kareem nodded slowly. Then you know, he said, what your choice is. The connection ended. Hale sat in the blue shimmer of the darkened display for a long moment, listening to the faint thrum of the ship around him, Ironwind's heartbeat, his cruise. He rose, keyed a channel. Comms, he said. Get me Specialist Oduro, secure line. On another deck, Talia's console blinked. She palmed the line open, pushed her chair back from the auditors with an apologetic shrug. Priority systems ping, sir, she said. Need to take this on an isolated interface. Regulations. The Praetorian inspector grunted, uninterested in the specifics of human bandwidth paths. Talia slipped into a side alcove, sealed a thin pressure door, and brought Hale's image up on a private, shielded panel. Specialist, Hale said, voice flat. You have been executing the Council's erasure directive. Yes, sir, Talia said carefully. How much of the Harun's March data is truly gone? He asked. Talia's heart stuttered. Officially, she said, the purge is proceeding according to protocol. The inspectors have witnessed substantial data removal. Specialist, Hale said, cutting through her caution. I am asking for a direct answer. No qualifiers. She met his gaze. It was a strange, fragile moment. A junior comms tech confessing to a capital offense to a superior officer who could, with a word, destroy or protect her. It's not gone, she said. I've rerouted it, fragmented it into routine traffic. Most of what we recorded is already distributed across the Lumen Arch's peripheral nodes in encrypted form. With the right trigger, we can reassemble it at any attached receiver. Hale's breath left him in a slow, controlled exhale. Explain, he said. She did, in compressed form. The embedding of data in correction codes, the exploitation of human design biases, the way redundancy could be turned from a safety mechanism into a weapon of disclosure. You understand, Hale said when she finished, that this is not just a breach of Council regulations, but also a violation of direct orders from your commanding officers. Yes, sir, Talia whispered. I'll accept any consequences. I couldn't watch that and then press delete. Hale closed his eyes briefly. Did you coordinate this with anyone? He asked. Talia hesitated. Informally, she said. Iseul Garin knew I was looking for ways to protect the recordings. She didn't see the code. She just reminded me what it's like when nobody believes victims because there is no proof. Hale opened his eyes. Keep the inspectors satisfied, he said. Finish the visible purge. I will convene a closed senior staff session at 10 a.m. You will be there. Bring everything you need to explain your workaround to the rest of us. Yes, sir, Talia said. And Specialist, Hale added. Until further notice, you are not to mention any of this to anyone outside that session, not even the journalist. Understood? Talia swallowed her instinctive protest. Yes, sir, she said. When the line went dead, she leaned back against the alcove wall, heart racing. She half expected alarm klaxons to start wailing, Council Guard to burst in. Instead, the Corps outside went on humming. Oblivious, she returned to her station, pasted on the same blandly respectful expression, and resumed erasing what was never really being erased. At 10 a.m., The secure conference room just off Ironwind's main war room filled with people who did not meet there lightly. Commodore Hale took the central seat. To his right, Iseul sat forward, fingers laced on the table, eyes sharp. To his left, a holoprojector cast Kareem Solanki's likeness into the air, scaled to match the others. The projection lag was minimal, thanks to the lumen arch, a subtle reminder of the infrastructure that now held at least part of their future. At the far end, Delem perched with their hands folded neatly in their lap, Naimani sensory frills pinned close against their skull in a gesture of controlled tension. Beside them, Tobin sat stiff-backed, the bruises around his eyes still visible. Talia Oduro stood at a small side console, palms sweating, a cluster of status lights reflected in her dark irises. "All right," Hale said. "We all know the official situation. The Council has ordered the complete erasure of Harun's March material from human systems. Specialist Oduro has made me aware that the situation is unofficially more complicated." He gestured. Talia tapped a control, and a schematic of the lumen arch rose over the table, a sweeping line of interconnected nodes stretching across familiar stars. "I didn't obey the erasure order completely," Talia said, voice quavering slightly. She cleared her throat. "Instead, I broke the data into small fragments and embedded them into our routine transmissions. They're already out along the arch. Think of it as spores in the air." Any other day, her choice of metaphor might have gotten a smile. Today, the faces around the table were too taut. "How recoverable is the material?" Kareem asked. "With the right keys," Talia said. "Completely. I designed a reconstruction algorithm that can be triggered by coordinated pulses from multiple human ships. Once activated, any system listening to human format traffic along the arch will start to rebuild the original footage and logs. Locally, it won't be a matter of pulling a single stream from us. It will just grow where it lands." Delem tilted their head, frills lifting slightly. "You have scattered the fire," they said softly. Talia winced. "I'm sorry," she said. "That's probably not the best." "No," Delem interrupted. "You misunderstand. On Harun's march, before the Khoryx came, we used controlled burns in our fields to prevent larger, uncontrolled conflagrations. You send small, deliberate flames to consume what would otherwise become fuel for catastrophe. What you are describing reminds me of that." Tobin spoke for the first time. "You're talking about making it impossible to erase," he said. There was a kind of bleak awe in his voice. "Yes," Talia said. "If we trigger it, right now, it's just latent, hidden, technically harmless." Hale drummed his fingers once on the table. "The Council auditors know nothing of this," he said. "As far as they are concerned, we are complying." "They know nothing," Talia confirmed. "For now." Iseul leaned back. "You just risked a charge of subversion punishable by I don't even know what under Council law," she said. "Why?" Talia looked at her, then at Delem, then at Tobin. "Because," she said, "I spent all night scrubbing blood out of data, and it felt like I was killing them again." Silence settled around the table, heavy but not hostile. Kareem exhaled. "Renan," he said, "you understand what this means." Hale nodded. "If we do nothing," he said, "the fragments sit there, unnoticed. The Council proceeds with its sanitized inquiry. Perhaps in a few cycles they release a report blaming local miscommunication and a few overzealous Khoryx, and the Naimani get a token apology." Delem's throat worked. "That would be familiar," they murmured. "If we trigger the reconstruction," Hale went on, "we break Council directive. We reveal what happened to every world with a compatible receiver. In one stroke, no time for them to spin it first." He raised his gaze to Kareem's projection. "What happens then, Ambassador?" he asked. Kareem's brow furrowed. "They will call it an act of information warfare," he said. "They will say you have undermined the Council's authority, endangered stability, and invited chaos. They may move to sanction human trade lanes, suspend your right to station ships in certain corridors, even deploy peacekeeping forces of their own to enforce compliance." "Which will look very interesting," Iseul said dryly. in light of the footage of their current peacekeepers. Nonetheless, Kareem said, they will try. Delem's voice, quiet but steady, cut through. What happens, they asked, if the truth does not come out? If the only ones who ever see what the Khoryx did to us are the few dozen aboard this ship and some archivists in the Citadel vaults? Hale met their gaze. The next time a colony becomes inconvenient, he said, the same thing happens again. Or something worse. Delem's frills lifted. On Harun's march, they said, we kept records of our history, not just the triumphs, the famines, the storms, the times we hurt each other. We believed that to repeat a mistake, we had to first forget it. The Khoryx destroyed most of those archives. They understood the value of forgetting. They looked around the table. You humans, Delem said, are strange. You carry your worst moments like talismans. You replay them until they scar your minds. It is hard for us to understand, but I begin to see the power in it. Tobin shifted, unable to sit still under that gaze. It doesn't feel like power, he muttered. It feels like being stuck. Stuck, Delem said, can be the opposite of sliding back. Hale interlaced his fingers, knuckles pale. We're not just talking about sending out Harun's march raw, he said. If we're going to tear the veil off, we need to give people a framework, context. If all they see is slaughter, some will respond with blind rage. That could spiral into something worse. Iseul's eyes gleamed. Her mind had been racing ahead since Talia mentioned triggers. Then we show them more than one atrocity, she said. We show them the pattern. Not just out here, back home. Our own history, too. Kareem looked at her sharply. You want to add human historical footage to this broadcast? He asked. Yes, Iseul said. Wars, camps, massacres, and then the tribunals, the commissions, the times we put our own in the dock and let the world watch. I want them to see that dragging horrors into the light doesn't end civilization. It can save it. Talia bit her lip. That's a lot to get through the filters, she said. You have already rewritten half our comm stack, Iseul said. You'll manage. Talia's cheeks colored. She had been hiding her terror behind technical focus. Now there was something else under it. A spark. Kareem rubbed his forehead. Renan, he said, you realize that if you do this, there's no going back. I know, Hale said. He rose, the decision settling on his shoulders like a mantle. In his mind, he saw the classified file from years ago, gathering dust in a human vault. He saw the faces of those no one had ever apologized to. I signed up to defend the citizens of Earth, he said. I did not sign up to be an accessory to someone else's cover-ups. Specialist Oduro, you will coordinate with Garen to assemble a package. Use what we have from Harun's march. Have historical analysis splice in our own past. Ambassador Solanki, we will need you to find us an opportunity. Opportunity? Kareem asked. A channel, Hale said. A time when the Council will make itself heard across the network. When hijacking their feed will make it impossible for them to pretend this is just a human outburst on a backwater relay. Kareem's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed in grudging admiration. They are planning a unity address, he said slowly. Velis wants to reassure the galaxy that the situation on Harun's march is under control. It will be broadcast simultaneously to thousands of systems via prioritized pathways. Perfect, Iseul murmured. Let them light the fuse for us. Talia swallowed. I can piggyback a trigger on that, she said. If I know the timing and the route maps, it won't be a single blast. It will be a cascade. A gentle, continuous pressure on every node that hears the address. The filters will register it as routine synchronization chatter. By the time they realize something's wrong, the reconstruction processes will have started everywhere. And once images begin to build, they can't stop it without cutting off their own speech. Iseul added. They'll have to choose between silence and being seen. Tobin looked from face to face, trying to find someone who would tell him this was madness. No one did. He thought of the Nemani bodies in the fields, of his own hands closing too late around a rifle, of Delem's eyes as they had spoken the names of the dead. If you're going to show them what I saw, he said, voice rough, I want to speak over it, not as a justification, just as what it was. We were there. We failed. I won't pretend otherwise. Hale studied him. You understand, Hale said, that you will become the face of this. If we succeed, some will call you courageous. If we fail, they will call you a traitor. Tobin's stomach twisted. I understand, he said, but those kids in the bunkers didn't have a choice about being on those recordings. I do. Delem's frills flared. I will stand with you, they said. There should be a Nemani voice as well. We were not just victims. We saw things build to this. We will name them. Hale nodded slowly. Then it's decided, he said. We go forward. We do this with eyes open. He looked around the table, meeting each gaze in turn. From this moment, he said, there are only two outcomes. Either this galaxy learns what it truly is, or we go down trying to tell it. The days that followed were a blur of double lives. On the surface, Ironwind presented an image of obedience. Council auditors moved through its corridors, checking logs, applauding the thoroughness of the erasures. The Praetorian Guard conducted random searches, storming into compartments with heavy boots and heavier weapons, looking for illicit backups that had already become indistinguishable from vacuum fluctuations. Renan Hale put on his formal jacket, attended joint briefings, nodded in all the right places. His crew saluted Praetorni officers they privately despised. Tobin submitted to psychological evaluations, his answers careful, his trauma documented for files that would never see a courtroom. Below that surface, another current ran. In a dim editing bay, Iseul and Talia Oduro sat shoulder to shoulder, faces lit by a dozen streams of ugly, beautiful, necessary truth. Hold it there, Iseul said. The footage froze on the image of a Khoryx squad advancing through a Nemani orchard, armored boots crushing fallen fruit into the soil. The camera shook with Tobin's breathing. Off to one side, a Nemani elder raised empty hands, mouth moving around words the translator pack could not quite catch over the noise. Now lay in the Earth sequence, Iseul said. Talia tapped commands. The orchard dissolved into an old, grainy feed. A line of human civilians walking under guard, past barbed wire, hollow-eyed, toward a camp. For a second, the two images overlapped, alien and human suffering echoing each other across centuries. How much of this are people going to recognize? Talia asked quietly. Enough, Iseul said. Those who don't will ask. Those who already know will be reminded what it means to look. They worked without sleep cycles, catching micro-naps in chairs when their vision blurred. They watched Tobin's viewpoint pass again and again through corridors choked with smoke, watched Delem's careful, devastating testimony recounted from a hospital bunk, watched archival tribunals where human officers stood in docks, faces ashen as verdicts were read. Above them, the Lumen Arch's carrier wave throbbed steadily, a cosmic heartbeat. On Trinal Citadel, Kareem Solanki walked corridors full of sharp glances and brittle politeness. Ambassador, a Cyrethi colleague murmured one evening, falling into step beside him. There is a rumor the humans are unhappy with the Council's guidance. Humans specialize in unhappiness, Kareem said. It keeps us industrious. The Cyrethi's crest flicked in a gesture that might have been amusement. See that it also keeps you prudent, they said. Archon Velis is patient, but only to a point. It would be unfortunate if your people's enthusiasm led to misunderstandings. We wouldn't want that, Kareem agreed. In private messages, he passed route updates and timing details through channels constructed on human cryptography. He sent the schedule for the Unity address set for 2 p.m. Standard, 2 days hence to Ironwind, flagged in a way that only Talia and Iseul would decode as the signal they needed. He did not know if he would still be at liberty afterward, so he moved through the station like a man tying off as many lines as possible before a storm. In a quiet medbay corner aboard Ironwind, Tobin sat on a stool, a simple recorder resting on the table between him and Delem. He had tried to write out what he would say. The words never seemed right on a screen. Now, in front of the tiny lens, they felt even more inadequate. Begin when you are ready, Delem said. They had insisted on being present, not to script him, but to witness. Tobin stared into the recorder's dark glass. "My name is Sergeant Tobin Ikuhara," he said, voice catching in the middle of his own name. "Human Marine Corps, attached to HSV Ironwind." He paused, inhaled. "On the day Harun's march burned," he said slowly, "I was on a transport orbiting above it. We heard there was unrest. We were told Nemani protesters had turned violent. We were told Khoryx peacekeepers needed a show of force to stabilize the situation." He thought of the flat tones of the council liaison officer, the way they had assured him it was under control. "We were told wrong," Tobin said. The lens watched, blank and unjudging. Delem listened, frills trembling. "I am recording this," Tobin continued, "because I do not want anyone to be able to say later that they didn't know. Because I failed to reach those bunkers in time. Because if the only thing I do now is stay quiet, then I am failing them again." He spoke of the orchard, of the children in the doorways, of his own panic and rage and fear. He did not edit out his curses, his choked apologies. He did not try to make himself look better. When he was finished, Delem activated their own recorder. "My name is Delem," they said. "I am Nemani. On the day Harun's march burned, I was cataloging soil samples. I had spent 20 years studying how small changes ripple through a system. I failed to notice the signs that something like this was coming. I will not fail to notice now." They spoke of their people's history, of previous incidents dismissed by the council, of partial transmissions that had conveniently never reached their intended recipients. They spoke of the hope they had once placed in the council's objectivity, and how it had curdled. Then they spoke of humans. "You arrive in this galaxy with your pockets full of your own sins," Delem said, voice almost dispassionate, "and yet you insist on airing them. It is disconcerting. But perhaps it is what we need. A species that treats memory not as a burden to be hidden, but as a tool to be used." As the day of the Unity Address approached, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Trinal citadels, public spaces filled with banners bearing the council sigil and the stylized emblem of the Unity Address. Interlocking circles, species colors blending. Broadcast teasers promised reassurance, clarity, and a reaffirmation of shared values. Archon Velis rehearsed his speech in a private chamber, his words honed to soothe fears while conceding nothing of substance. He would acknowledge the tragedy on Harun's march, express sorrow at the loss of life, and emphasize the importance of orderly investigation over dangerous speculation. He expected some pushback from minor species. He expected humans to bristle, perhaps even lodge official protests. He did not expect what Ironwind had prepared. On the morning of the address, at 11 a.m., Praetorian boarding craft detached from Trinal Citadel and began a quiet, staggered journey toward human vessels in orbit. Archon Velis had not ordered a full-scale seizure. That would be too obvious, and he still cared about appearances. These were, technically, inspection teams, tasked with ensuring human compliance with the erasure directive. By 1 p.m., one of those craft had latched onto Ironwind's dorsal airlock. On the bridge, Hale watched the docking clamps lock in the status overlays. "They're early," he said. Talia sat at her console, hands poised over control pads, heart hammering so hard it felt like it might interfere with the ship's intranet. Her trigger sequence scripts were loaded, ready to unfurl along the arch at the slightest command. "Council likes to be thorough," Iseul observed. She stood near the tactical rail, eyes flicking between the view screens and her own wrist display. "Tobin," Hale said, "you and your squad to defensive positions by the dorsal lock. Non-lethal measures as primary. We are not going to be the ones to turn this into a hot war." "Yes, sir," Tobin said, standing. His stomach turned as he strapped on armor. He had thought he was done fighting indoors for a while. On Trinal Citadel, at 2 p.m., the lights in the council chamber dimmed. Holographic banners flared, casting the hall in soft, reassuring tones. Delegates took their seats, at least in symbolic unison. In homes and plazas and public halls across dozens of worlds, families and workers and students tuned in. The Unity Address began. Archon Velis stepped to the central dais, crest jewels glittering. "Citizens of the Council," he intoned, "today we gather not to deny hardship, but to affirm our resilience." At that moment, in Ironwind's comms core, Talia Oduro tapped a sequence that left a faint afterimage on her retinas. The trigger packets left the ship's antennae in a whisper of radio and structured light, tucked into navigation checks and synchronization pulses so bland no filter thought to question them. They hit the nearest lumen arch nodes and replicated, hopping from relay to relay, riding on the same priority channels that carried Velis's voice. On a mining station at the edge of civilized space, a bored technician rolled their eyes as the Archon spoke solemnities. The feed flickered. For a fraction of a second, instead of Velis's face, they saw a flash of dust and running figures and the hard, brutal line of a Khoryx visor. On a Nimani agricultural world not yet touched by war, children watched the address as part of a school assignment. Their teacher frowned as the image hiccuped, stabilized, hiccuped again. On a Khoryx barracks ship docked to a supply ring, off-duty soldiers gathered around a display, expecting another smug council performance. They barked laughter when the signal stuttered. Velis continued speaking, unaware. "We must remember that unity is not the absence of discord, but our capacity to manage it." In the control tiers above the chamber, technicians glanced at diagnostic panels that showed slight anomalies in the outbound streams. Nothing serious, they told themselves. The lumen arch could be finicky. The address was high bandwidth. Some glitches were inevitable. Then the cascade reached critical mass. On an education hub halfway across the council's domain, a lecturer preparing to teach a history course watched with growing confusion as his lecture screen, tuned to the address, froze on Velis mid-sentence. The Archon's image went pixelated, smeared, and then dissolved. In its place, a viewpoint sprang to life. Tobin Ikuhara's helmet camera, swinging wildly as he ran through the shattered streets of Harun's march. Sound hit an instant later. The crack of impeller fire, the distant, high keening of terrified Nimani, the curt Khoryx commands in a harsh, barking language. Subtitles, generated by Talia's algorithms and refined by Delem, overlaid the scene. In the council's own chamber, Velis's face vanished from the vast display banners. Delegates gasped. "What is the meaning of this?" Velis demanded, spinning toward the technicians. In the control tiers, alarms belatedly lit. Systems flagged a surge of unauthorized reconstruction processes on endpoints across the network. The technicians scrambled to cut the feed, reroute through backups, switch to alternate routes. Every backup carried the same silent infection. Every route was already seeded. On a Praetorian-heavy world, citizens who had never seen their own soldiers in anything but recruitment holos now watched as Praetorian Guard, in Harun's march's final hours, stood immobile at the edges of the killing fields, orders coming through their earpieces to hold position. On a Khoryx home cluster, a young soldier watched his kin mow down fleeing Nimani and found, to his own surprise, that he felt something like nausea. On Nimani worlds scattered across the Council's reach, survivors of other disturbances recognized, with a shudder, the pattern they had been told didn't exist. The footage did not run as one unbroken horror. It intercut. A column of smoke rising over Harun's march blurred into black and white footage of human cities in ruin. The barked orders of Khoryx officers bled into the cold commands of human generals from an earlier century. The image of a Nimani elder falling under indiscriminate fire overlapped with that of a human prisoner collapsing in a campyard. Then, just when the weight of it threatened to crush all air from the rooms where it played, the sequence shifted. In courtroom after courtroom, tribunal after tribunal, humans stood in docks built by their own kind. Translated audio carried the words, guilty, sentence, responsibility. Tobin's voice, recorded in Ironwind's medbay, cut through. "We were told we were going to keep the peace," he said. His words were carried on council bandwidth into millions of homes. "We were told the situation was under control. We arrived late. By then, the Khoryx had already begun slaughtering civilians. I saw children trying to reach bunkers that were later shelled from orbit. We tried to intervene. We failed." Delem's voice followed, calm and devastating. "We were told our earlier reports of abuses were isolated incidents," they said. "We were told the Council had no verified evidence. Now you have it. What you choose to do with it will define what this civilization is. On Ironwind's dorsal corridor, Praetorine boots hammered against deck plating as armored figures advanced toward the inner airlock. Tobin and his squad waited at the first pressure door, non-lethal launchers in hand, shock grenades clipped to their belts. "Remember," Tobin said into his squad channel, "we're not here to win a fight. We're here to not start a war." The inner hatch cycled. The first Praetorine stepped through, towering, weapon raised. At that exact heartbeat, the shock grenades detonated, blinding light, concussive sound tuned to Praetorine inner ear sensitivities. The giants staggered, disoriented. "Now!" Tobin snapped. His squad surged forward, firing stun rounds at exposed gaps in armor. The projectiles delivered crippling electrical jolts, enough to drop even a Praetorine for a few minutes. The boarding party crumpled in a heap of metal and muscle. "Seal the hatch," Tobin ordered. "Vent the next compartment to low pressure. They'll have to back off or crack their suits." On the bridge, Hale watched status indicators shift from green to amber around the dorsal section. "Report," he said. "Boarding team contained." Tobin's voice came through, breathless but controlled. "No fatalities. Yet. Hold them," Hale said. "As long as you can, without escalating." On Trinal Citadel, chaos reigned. Delegates rose from their seats, shouting over one another. Some in rage, some in shock, some in vindication. On the walls, the slick council insignias were replaced by flickering, unstoppable images of the very acts the council had tried to classify away. Archon Velis slammed a hand on the control plate of his dais. "Cut the feed," he snarled. "We are attempting to—" "Archon," a technician stammered from the control tier. "The processes are distributed. It's not a single stream. It's everywhere. Even when we sever a route, local nodes are seeding the content peer-to-peer." Velis's gaze snapped to the human delegation's table. Kareem Solanki did not flinch. He stood slowly, deliberately, as if rising in a calm session. The hall's lights danced across his face, now alternately lit by battlefields and tribunals. "Ambassador Solanki," Velis said, his voice cold enough to freeze hydrogen. "Explain this." Kareem let the noise of the chamber wash around them for a heartbeat, then lifted his hands, palms open. "What you are seeing," he said, pitching his voice so it carried through the chamber's acoustic focuses, "are authenticated recordings from Harun's march, cross-validated by human and Nemani systems, intercut with records from our own history on Earth, and with prior council incidents that match the same pattern. You have hijacked a council broadcast," Velis hissed. "This is a violation of—" "This," Kareem interrupted, "is the sharing of evidence with all affected parties instead of burying it in a vault where only elites may decide what the rest of us are fit to know." Gasps, murmurs with edges. Velis drew himself up. "Humanity," he said, "has overstepped. You were brought into this council under the assumption that you would respect our processes. Instead, you have spread destabilizing propaganda across our entire network. Do you deny it?" "No," Kareem said. "I acknowledge it. We chose to reveal what you ordered destroyed, and we did it in a way you cannot simply cut out because you do not own all the receivers anymore. You invited us into your house, Archon. You cannot be surprised that we brought our habits with us. Your habits," Velis said, "will break the fragile peace we have maintained. These images will inflame old grievances, ignite new conflicts." "You have armed demagogues on every world." Delem stepped forward from the observer's row, slim Nemani form dwarfed by the towering Praetorian guards flanking the hall. Officially, they had no right to speak. Practically, the chamber's focus shifted to them, like iron to a magnet. "Archon," Delem said, in a voice that carried more weight than any amplification. "Old grievances did not need arming. They have been carrying weapons for decades. The only difference now is that the weapons point at those who held the story hostage." Velis looked as if he had been slapped. "You would endorse this chaos?" he demanded. Delem's frills lifted. "I endorse memory," they said. "For years, Nemani survivors have been told their recollections were distorted, their recordings insufficient. Now everyone can see. If that causes unrest, the fault lies not with the act of seeing, but with the acts that were done." In the tiers above, representatives from minor species watched, some with dawning courage. A Praetorian delegate, her armor subdued to ceremonial tones, touched the insignia at her collar thoughtfully as she watched footage of her own people standing by. In military control rooms, commanders barked orders to isolate human channels, only to find their own screens still playing the footage from distant caches. In homes, families argued. On streets, crowds gathered around public displays, their faces lit by other people's tragedies, recognizing their own. On Ironwind, in the comms core, Talia monitored the spread with a combination of terror and a strange, fierce pride. "It's working," she whispered. "They can cut us off entirely now, and it won't matter. It's everywhere." "Good," Iseul said, leaning over her shoulder. "Get backups of every reaction you can. This isn't just about the initial shock, it's about how they respond." "Renan," Kareem's voice came through Hale's private channel, tight but level. "They're calling for our detention. All human delegates. Possibly you as well. Once they stabilize internal systems." "Status of support?" Hale asked. "Mixed," Kareem said. "Minor delegations are demanding an open tribunal. Some major blocks are hedging. The Khoryx are furious. The Praetorian are unsettled." Hale watched as a new set of signals popped up on his tactical display. Ships changing course, some heading toward Ironwind, others away. The neat, predictable patterns of Council fleet doctrine were fraying. "Hold your ground," Hale said. "We're not firing unless fired on." "You may not have that luxury if they board you with live rounds next time," Kareem said. "Then they get to decide, very publicly, whether they want to follow a massacre with another," Hale replied. On Trinal Citadel, Velis gathered himself with an effort visibly costing him. "Security," he said, voice echoing across internal comms. "All human delegates are to be placed under protective custody for their own safety. All Council Guard units are to prepare to secure human vessels if they make any aggressive moves." In the control tiers, some officers moved immediately. Others hesitated, eyes flicking to the footage, still playing in the corners of their vision. The phrase, "for their own safety," felt crooked in their mouths. A Praetorian squad approached the human delegation seating zone. Kareem stood his ground. Delem, to his own surprise, stepped to stand beside him. "You will come with us," the Praetorian captain said, voice a resonant growl. "For your protection." "Will you also be protecting those who tried to erase this?" Delem asked mildly. The captain's eyes, deep-set under ridged brows, flicked to the walls, to the images of her own comrades, doing nothing amid slaughter. "We go," Kareem said quietly to Delem. "We can shout just as loudly from a holding room." Delem inclined their head. "As long as they let us keep speaking," they said. The Praetorian captain signaled. Her squad formed a loose ring around Kareem and Delem. More escort than prison march, at least for the moment. Outside, in 1,000 skies, small ships changed flags. Some took down the council banner and ran under no colors at all. Others raised hastily painted symbols of solidarity with Harun's march. On a Khoryx frontier station, 2 junior officers stared at each other over the playback of their brethren mowing down civilians. "They used us," one said hoarsely. "We followed," the other replied, equally shaken. On a Praetorian cruiser, a communications technician paused with a finger hovering over an order to jam human frequencies, then let his hand fall away, leaving the channels open a little longer than regulations allowed. On Naimani worlds, sirens sounded not in fear, but to call people into public squares. Massive screens showed the full composite sequence: Harun's march, Earth's wars, council-sanctioned erasures, tribunals that had yet to happen. Delem's voice carried over crowds, recorded hours earlier and already looping everywhere. "In the fields of Harun's march," Delem said, "we learned that crops cannot grow when the soil is salted with lies. The council salted our dead with forgetfulness. The humans have uprooted that. What grows now is up to all of us." The climax passed not as a single explosion, but as a rolling wave. For hours, the council tried to regain narrative control. Velis issued statements calling for calm, warning against hasty judgments. Khoryx leaders blustered about context. Some major species suggested that while the footage was disturbing, it might have been selectively edited. In response, secondary and tertiary caches of material lit up. Uncut recordings, unflattering to humans as well as to Council forces, spread alongside transcripts of commands from Council liaisons telling Harun's March's defenders to stand down. The more the ruling bloc tried to wrestle the story back into its own shape, the more it slipped through their fingers. When the Council Guard moved to seize Ironwind a second time, it was under a barrage of scrutiny. Dozens of minor vessel cameras had focused on the human flagship, transmitting every motion. To fire now would be to do so in full view of a galaxy that had just watched one slaughter. The Guard commander, a Praetorian whose private screen still replayed the expression of the Nemani elder falling in that orchard, held his force at the edge of engagement range. "We hold position," he said, "unless fired upon." "But the Archon's orders," his aide began, "include the words, 'if necessary,'" the commander said. "Anyone can read them on the public server. We will not be the first to spill blood on this day." On Ironwind's bridge, Hale saw the Council ship's hesitation and knew they had, at least for now, bought breathing space. His chest ached with something like relief and something like dread. "We're committed," Iseul said quietly beside him, watching the same displays. "There's no world in which we walk this back." "I know," Hale said. "The only question now is what comes next." Over the next day, the first concrete answers began to filter through. A block of minor species, led by Nemani, and joined by several Praetorian dissidents, and even a handful of Khoryx veterans, disgusted by what they had seen, formally petitioned for the establishment of a new tribunal structure, a truth commission with open hearings, cross-species representation, and full access to evidence. They explicitly cited human historical models that had appeared in the broadcast. "If this structure is good enough for the species that first proposed it," Delem said in a statement carried wide, "it is good enough for the rest of us." Archon Velis could not openly oppose such a body without confirming his worst critic's accusations. He tried to slow-walk it, bury it in committees. The public fury made that difficult. In holding rooms on Trinal Citadel, Kareem Solanki gave interviews under guard, careful to never phrase his answers in a way that could be spun as a call to arms, but relentless in reaffirming that yes, humans had knowingly disobeyed an order to destroy evidence, and no, they did not regret it. "My people rose to space on a ladder built from our own mistakes," he said in one such exchange. "We have learned we cannot survive if our darkest moments are left to rot unseen. We will not give up that lesson at the Council's door." On Ironwind, Talia watched new logs scroll in. Requests for technical assistance from odd quarters. Encrypted pings from data archivists on far worlds, who wanted to know how to harden their own record-keeping against erasure. Some wanted code. Others wanted philosophy. "You realize," Iseul said, "you've just started an arms race between censors and witnesses." Talia, exhausted, smiled faintly. "Good," she said. "Witnesses need better arms." Tobin returned to Harun's march only in his dreams. In waking hours, he helped Delem catalog survivor testimonies, cross-reference them with other species reports that were now flowing in. Each story was another cut, but also another thread in a net they were throwing over the Council's comfortable fictions. One evening, after a shift that felt like three compressed into one, he stood by an observation port, looking out at the scattered lights of ships clustering around Ironwind. They were not all human, small Nemani vessels, their hulls painted in the patterns of their lost fields. A Praetorian ship with its insignia dulled, running lights dim, staying close, as if offering silent escort. Even a Khoryx scout, hanging back at the fringes, neither threatening nor fleeing. Hale joined him, hands clasped behind his back. "You did well," Hale said quietly. Tobin, who could still feel every person he had not saved, almost laughed. "We started something," he said. "I don't know if that counts as well yet." Hale watched the distant specks. "It took us a long time," he said, "to understand on Earth that the measure of a military wasn't just in how well it fought, but in how it dealt with its own failures. We made a lot of mistakes, some of them unforgivable. But the one we couldn't keep making was pretending they never happened. He glanced at Tobin. "You help make sure we're not importing that last mistake out here," Hale said. "That matters." Tobin swallowed. "Even if it gets us kicked out of the council?" he asked. "If being in the council means agreeing never to embarrass it," Hale said, "then yes, even then." Beyond the port, the lumen arch glowed faintly, a curve of light connecting stars, like a scar and a promise. Ironwind held position at the edge of the largest tangle of council traffic. The human flagship's drives were warm, ready to flee if this turned into open war, but for the moment no one moved against them. Messages continued to stream in. Some were full of gratitude, some were coldly practical, a few were full of hate, blaming humans for stirring unrest, accusing them of moral arrogance. Iseul collated them all, her eyes burning not with exhaustion, but with purpose. "This is the cost," she said to no one in particular, staring at a Naimani child's drawing sent from a distant world. A field under a clean sky, and in the corner, a tall human figure holding a recording device like a lantern. If truth was free, someone else would have paid it already. In the council's upper chambers, Archon Velis stared at the latest reports, crest ornaments lying dull on the table before him. He had spent his entire career learning how to keep a volatile coalition from fragmenting. He had justified compromises, secret deals, and small brutalities as the price of avoiding larger catastrophes. He had believed, or told himself he believed, that he was doing what was necessary. Now, for the first time, he saw the cost of his stability laid out in images the whole galaxy could see. He did not suddenly become a different person, but a crack had formed in his certainty. "Perhaps," he murmured to his empty office, "we should have let your kind stay home." He meant the humans. Yet, somewhere deep under that thought, there was a grudging, simmering acknowledgement. They had forced his hand, and in doing so, they had revealed the fault lines his own order had carefully paved over. He reached for a stylus. "Prepare the framework for a joint investigatory body," he dictated to the recording system. "Inclusion of minor species delegates. Limited, for now, but visible." He would try, of course, to keep it as toothless as possible. Old habits died hard. The humans and their new allies would fight to give it fangs. The struggle would be long. It might break the council. It might break humanity's place in it. It might save more worlds like Harun's March, or it might not. Out between stars, Ironwind floated amid a slowly growing cluster of ships that had decided, in small and large ways, to stand too close to be easily separated. On the bridge, Wren and Hale looked at the constellation of their new, uncertain allies. "We're not alone anymore," he said. Talia, Tobin, Iseul, and the others stood with him, each carrying their own scars and small hopes. "Did you ever think," Iseul asked softly, "that the thing we'd bring to the galaxy that mattered most wouldn't be our drives, or our weapons, or our trade, but our refusal to shut off the camera?" Hale considered that. "It figures," he said. "We've always been fond of our messy truths." He turned his gaze back to the arch, to the thin line of light that now carried not just words, but the knowledge that someone, somewhere, was always watching. The future was foggy, full of angles and risks their models could barely map. The council could retaliate hard. The tribunal could become a sham. New atrocities could follow. But one door, at least, would be harder to close. In a galaxy that had learned to mistake secrecy for peace, a stubborn, loud, historically haunted species had just taught everyone how fragile that illusion was. And for the first time in a long while, countless ordinary beings across the stars sat down, opened their receivers, and watched together, knowing that what they saw was real and that the ones in power knew they were watching. That, for now, was enough.